Hello and welcome to the Moonshots Podcast. It's episode 267. I'm your co-host, Mike Parsons, and as always, I'm joined by the man himself, Mr. Mark Pearson-Freeland. Good morning, Mark.
Hey, good morning, Mike. Good morning, members. Good morning, subscribers. Good morning, viewers. Good morning, listeners. And good morning, everybody else who wants to join us today to dive into a brand new topic on the Moonshot Show. And Mike, maybe I'm overcooking it a little bit, but I think there's one thing on my mind today that we could dive into. And I think it's going to be the topic of this fantastic book.
Yes, I think it's the classic 1-2 punch. We did essentialism last episode, and today we are digging into another classic, another one that you might say, what the hell have Mark and Mike been doing? It's taken them 10 years to get to this book, but I assure you the wait has been worth it. If you want to go from being productive to a productive God, if you really want to make exponential returns on your effort, this show is for you.
Wow. I'll tell you what, Mike, the idea of becoming a productivity God speaks volumes. So, without further ado, for our listeners, viewers, as well as members, today, guys, we are diving into Gary Keller's The One Thing. And like Mike was just breaking down for us, this is not only a fantastic breakdown into productivity and efficiency, but we're also going to learn today how we can focus on a single, most crucial task to go out and achieve extraordinary success. Because at the end of the day, we all know that there's one thing that we could do that by doing it probably opens up a little bit more time, a little bit more flexibility, maybe even a little bit more of a calm, relaxed mindset. And that today, folks, is what we're going to be really diving into on show number 267.
All right, Mark, you've got us armed with some great clips. Why don't you let it rip?
Look, guys, I want to kick off by really introducing this concept of the one thing. So why don't we hear from the author himself, Gary Keller, telling us a bit of a story about writing the book and how we all should focus on one thing.
The issue was when we went to write the book, it wasn't originally going to be called this. We were going down a different path. And finally, what happened was Jay asked me the question. He goes, well, Gary, what's the one thing, interestingly enough, that you want people to get from this book? Well, it's the focusing question. And he said, okay then, first, let's call it the one thing. And number two, let's make that the issue in the book. Right. And so that's what happened. So all of a sudden it became called the one thing, and the focusing question became... Now the only reason why you don't get to it to chapter 10 is because I'm thoroughly convinced that if your head is full of the wrong stuff, there's no room for the right stuff.
You gotta get rid of all the junk first.
Yeah. So I traditionally, if you're ever in a class with me or being coached by me, I'm traditionally going to say, first thing we need to do is we need to get out the myths of or whatever you're thinking now that's incorrect. So it's really two books. For the first half of the book is really about the myths, the challenges, the lies, that people buy into that keep them from being willing to do one thing.
Ooh, it's almost like you got to clear the space before you can truly answer the question of one thing. And what I'm hearing there, Mark, is a story of distraction, the story of multitasking, or something that we discovered in the last show is people simply not saying no. And when they are a victim of one or all of these things, then what happens is you're spreading yourself way too thin, and you're just in a frenzy to tick things off as opposed to be ticking off the right things. And it's so interesting that the challenge that I think all of us face is the sense that everybody else is being so productive except us. Everybody else is doing so many things apart from us. But really, that is the lie. That is the myth. And in fact, we have seen continuously on the show, Mark, that those are the ones that win are those that do focus on one thing for an extended, consistent amount of time. And so I truly believe this is a secret because you see so few people talking about it. I think this is why deep work was so powerful, why our most recent show, Essentialism, focusing on less but better, it truly does work. It's the antithesis to Distraction Nation. Mark, this is why I think we need it. Why do you think we need to ask this question? What's the one thing?
Well, like you say, Mike, I think there's a productivity myth whereby as long as you have a grasp of every single thing that you need to get done, it's going to get done. So I'm talking about myself. I've got a Todoist app. I've got paper versions of things that I need to get done. There'll be subtasks. There'll be comments, all sorts of ways of making me feel as though I'm getting stuff done. But realistically, when I take a step back, or let's say I pass it over to you, Mike, and I'd say, hey, Mike, look how productive I am. Look at all the sort of planning I've done around my task list. None of it's really getting done because at this point, there's paralysis from too much analysis.
Yeah.
And I think that's a coin or a phrase that maybe we heard from last week with Greg McCowan and essentialism. But the concept, for me at least, kicks in and becomes very, very difficult when you are starting to scrutinize all the things you're trying to get done, but you don't know where to start. You know, there's so much that you need to get done. Maybe that's life admin, maybe it's planning your legacy for your children, or maybe it's starting a new business. Where do I go? Do I lean into the legal stuff? Do I build the website? Do I need to do social media? What about content creation? And what about hiring? Suddenly it feels very, very challenging because you're spread, as you say, so thin. But really, I think the core unlock that we're going to find out today is trying to prioritize. And I think that's the myth that we have maybe missed out on when it comes to to-do lists in the past. As we know, your brain isn't a fantastic supercomputer. Yes. So when you're looking at a big to-do list, it's not very easy to prioritize, is it? Because there's so much. They all seem equally important.
Yeah, it's like the paradox of choice. There's just so many things. And eliminating them, saying no to things, saying yes to one thing really is powerful. It's almost like if you have your base level, if you choose for a life of productivity, you've probably got a list. So that's the next level up. Then the step after that is saying what's urgent, what's important, doing, the Eisenhower matrix. So you kind of go up another level, right? So you're getting pretty elite here, like, let's be honest. But the all-time mega question is not just what am I going to do next? What should I do? But it's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will become easier or unnecessary. And we're going to get really into this during the show. But this is why I want you to visualize like a pyramid. And at the top is this question. Because actually, as we'll see, it does take work to figure out how to use this. It doesn't necessarily come easy because part of it means saying no to some addictions, distraction, multitasking, saying yes to everything. These are all addictions in some fashion.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you, Mark, like personal experience, big fan of the book, big fan of this technique, and I truly think it puts you in the Parthenon of productivity. But Mark, I wonder if we were to ask this question, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, I could go to the moon? What would be that action? What would be that priority, I wonder?
You're right, Mike. That's a good question. And I think for all of our viewers, listeners, and I know for a fact our members are already doing it, if you're wanting to maybe go to the moon, maybe unlock some secrets and some productivity hacks and the areas of influence that a lot of superstars out in the world are really doing day by day, I think, Mike, there's one destination that they could all go to unlock those hacks, and that is moonshots.io. That is the website of the Moonshot Podcast. That contains a huge archive, Mike, 266 shows, as well as links to our master series, where we've got well over 30 episodes now, as well as transcriptions, upcoming shows, and all sorts of goodies that can help all of us unlock a little bit more around how we could perhaps improve our productivity, how we could better our focus.
And there is a big button they could press there. And if they do so, they could get the official Mark Pearson Freeland trumpets, Mark.
Well, yes, that's right, Mike. We haven't added the sound effect to the website yet. So for those who want to hear it, you've got to listen in to the Moonshots Weekly as well as the Master Series each week, because we have a number of members who are joining us every single week. And as always, we're going to give them a wonderful shout out, including Bob, Niles, iTripton, Dietmar, Marjan Connor, Lisa and Sid, Mr. Bonjour, Paul, Berg and Kalman, Joe, Christian, Samola and Barbara, Deborah, Lasse, Stephen, Craig, Ravi, Evert, Raul and Nikawara, Ingram, Dirk, Venkata, Marco, Jet, Roger, Stefan, Raw, Nimalen, Diana, Christoph and Denise, Laura, Smitty, Corey and Daniela, Mike, Antonio, Zachary and Austin, Fred, Ola, Andy, Diana, Margie, Ron, Jasper, Fabian, Guhong, and Edward. Guys, thank you so much. I know that all of those individuals have joined us on the Moonshots rocket ship. We are diving up into the world of reflection, of improvement, and we're all trying to find the way to be the best version of ourselves. Thank you guys for joining us.
Yep, we're super grateful, helping us pay some bills. So thank you for your support. We really do appreciate it. And in return, we would like to set you up now for the deep dive. Sorry, Mark, I did steal your trumpets, but it felt only appropriate to go into the heart of this book by Gary Keller, The One Thing. So why don't you let it rip?
That's right, Mike. So now we're going to lean into the core element of the book. We're going to dive into the real essence of the one thing, and Clark Kegley Jr. is going to be the one to take us on that journey. So let's hear from Clark talking to us about the idea of the one thing.
Key concept of the book, that if you look at anybody who's achieved success at any level, you can trace it back to focusing on one thing. Examples: Google, what's their one thing? Search. Starbucks, what's their one thing? Coffee. KFC, what's their one thing? Chicken. Apple, what's their one thing? It changes. It goes from iPhone to iPod to iMac, but it still centers around one thing. Star Wars, this is cool. What's their one thing? It's not movies, it's merchandise. I think they made 10 billion from merchandise, or 30 billion, and 1 or 10 billion from the movies. I mean, Michael Phelps, swimming. Tiger Woods, golf. You know, Tiger Woods didn't say, I'm going to be a swimmer, golfer, and basketball player. He said, all I'm going to do from day one is focus on golf. And he's number one in the world. So how do you apply this to your life? Well, I think the take-home message from that is don't feel bad if you're spending all your time focusing on one aspect. Maybe you love soccer, right? Maybe you're 16, you love soccer, and you want to do that full time. Well, don't feel bad that you're not good at any of the other sports because your one thing is soccer. Yeah, some of them are going to translate over to basketball because you can run better. Don't try and focus on basketball as well. That's time you're taking away from that you could be practicing on soccer. The quote in the book that goes, if you try and catch 2 rabbits, you won't catch either. So the biggest concept of this book, focus your energy on one thing. Don't try and chase 2 rabbits. Much easier said than done. I mean, you guys who watch this channel know that I spread myself really thin. I do these kind of lifestyle videos. I do Kegley Co in the back there. I do drums. I do podcasting. And so this book was bittersweet for me, much like yourself, I'm sure, because you have so many different interests, right? And we hear that success is when you narrow it down and focus on one thing. Well, now you got to choose, and that means saying no to other things. And so it can be a little stressful, I understand. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. And then there's the other side that says, okay, well, if you look at millionaires in the US, an average majority of them have multiple streams of income. So they're not putting their one thing in income. They're getting it from 5 or 6 different places. So there's always, pros and cons to anything. So don't take the one thing as gospel. But the takeaway message is that success leaves clues. Look at the most successful people, the most successful companies, and they had a focus around one thing.
So, now, interesting thing for me, I really relate to this. Like, I love coaching rugby, but I don't coach it because I'm committed to the work that I'm doing in my company, and I can't do both. I've been DJing for 30 years, but currently I've paused on the DJ button because I'm focused on my company. So this is bittersweet, as Clark says. Like, it's very easy. Like, I get a call preseason. Great rugby club is like, oh, Mike, we'd love you to come and coach. Oh, I just want to do this, right? But at what cost, right? I got the turntables over here. I can look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are the turntables. I listened to a fresh mix from one of my favorite DJs and I'm like, oh boy, I just want to hit the turntables and let go, right? But actually this is like this. It's really hard to do, but it matters because we see from the examples Clark gave, and we've mentioned many of them, Einstein being one of them, that you have to grind and focus for years if you truly want to see what you can do with something. 4 years focused. And I believe that very rarely do we hear anybody saying to us, Mark, give up lots of things you love, focus on the one thing for 5 years, and then maybe you'll achieve some level of mastery. Nobody is talking like that. We're seeing like in 30 days, 6-pack abs, in 30 days, make 10 million bucks, drop shipping, whatever, right? You see the war we're at is with false expectations of you can do everything. And if you truly just look at what successful people have done is a lifetime of focus and obsessing about this one thing, right? And I think that there are lots of examples we're going to get into, but this is not a common message. Even after the success of this book, even after the success of this author in other parts of his life, you still don't hear this story very much, do you?
No, you really, really don't. And I think that's because we, as you've already pointed out, we are grown up, so to speak, in businesses and business tasks that require multitasking and plate spinning and having balls in the air, because we think that moving the chess piece forward requires lots and lots of different focal points and different areas of effort. I'm reminded of musicians nowadays. Not only do they have to create, banging tunes, but they also need to create content on all the social media channels. So suddenly this equation or this balance, this weight comes back to what you said earlier, at what cost?
Yes.
So if I'm spending time creating content, how much time am I sacrificing actually creating the artistic work that I want to go out and do?
Yes.
Like we heard from Rick Rubin, you just need to grind, have absolute focus. It doesn't need to take 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. Instead, it just needs to be really, really focused work on the single thing.
Yeah.
And you're right, Mike. We don't really get taught this. And I think once we delved into this book as we were putting the show together, and I know the book is one of your firm favorites as well, for me, it was a real aha moment, because I was, whether it's a project management work, account director work, or just working with entrepreneurs trying to build businesses, it always comes down to trying to wear many, many hats.
Yes.
But the problem with that is when you become a jack of all trades, you are not necessarily building those skills, are you, to then be able to go deep. And you do become like a cracker. You've got a little bit of butter on, but you're not that tasty.
Yeah. And that's a great metaphor. but truly, if you want to be like a great cook in the kitchen, right? The key thing is it's not only making a choice for one thing, but there is a qualifier on this. So I'm going to read to you the one thing question that you can ask. And then you and I have prepared a couple of examples that we can talk through. And I think this is at the heart for all of our listeners, viewers, and members. If you want to understand what this book can do for you and what this idea can do for you, here is what it is. It's not just about saying, I'm going to do deep work and just write an article. It's really asking yourself, what would be the smartest one thing to do? And let me set it up, Mark, and then we can play this game and go through the 5 examples. So the question the focusing question, which is at the heart of this book. This is how you battle against distraction, multitasking. This is how you battle against saying yes to everything and start saying no to most things, right? Here's the question. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or even unnecessary? Now, it's those bits at the end where we're really getting down to business. So I'll give you guys all an example of what we're talking about. In business, someone might say, what's the one thing I can do to increase sales this quarter such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So you're in business and you want to increase sales. Now, Mark, why don't you read out for the listeners what an example would be of applying this thinking to that question?
I think, Mike, as we were talking about it prior to the show, it's really around maybe focusing specifically on one single task. So maybe in this instance, it's nurturing relationships with maybe the top clients that you have within your business. So really focusing on referrals, focusing on maybe upselling some of the work that you're doing with them, and leaning into that valuable word of mouth references and referrals, because that's going to not only maybe increase the revenue that you're generating, but also it's going to simplify that sales process that you have.
So what this example does is helps you not just jump in and send out 100 cold emails and hoping someone answers, right? What you can see is the thoughtfulness here as well. Hey, asking yourself, like, well, who would be the highest value clients to get? Well, those that get referred to us will be the easiest, will be the best, because the trust has already been built through the referral. Okay, well, how do we go get those? Well, let's go spend some time with our best clients and ask them for that referral. So you're not only nurturing the existing customer relation, but you're also asking them to be almost part of your sales team. That is the one thing thinking in action. So notice it wasn't just send out a gazillion emails. It was to be much smarter. Okay. But this applies in so many areas. Mark, I'll read out this next one about career development. Again, you can hit us with the answer and we can break it down. So imagine you're thinking about developing your career. Here's how you'd use the question. What's the one thing I can do to advance in my career such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? What's the example, Mark?
Well, an example here would be to acquire a high impact skill that is in demand in your specific field, making you more valuable to your employer, and then advancing your career naturally.
Right. Now, what are we fighting against here? Everybody's like, they're in their job, they want to develop their career, and someone comes along, offers them the same job for a little bit more money. So they go, okay, I'm leaving and I'm going to that. While they might perceive it as going up, I'm getting paid more. Did you upskill anymore? No, you didn't. Did you personally grow anymore? Maybe, but here's the thing. If you go get this new skill, this new course, this new certification, maybe your existing employer sees even more value in you and invest more in you, and that you don't have to go through the big bet of leaving somewhere you know, maybe you love the people, right? And that you can naturally grow within that environment, and maybe you can get into a habit, and this is very kind of James Clear Atomic Habits. Perhaps you get one of those certifications once a year, once every 2 years, or maybe you do a little mini course on the summer break. That could be a way that you're continually adding value to yourself, you're growing as a human, whilst also increasing your skill, making it more likely you get promoted. And then when people do come to you, they're not just offering you 5-10% more salary. They're offering you 5 steps up, 10, like in a market, 10 times bigger, because you've shown this consistent path of self-discipline, self-growth. That's kind of one thing thinking. All right, hit us with the next one, Mark. What do you got?
Well, a topic that I know all of our listeners and members love, and that's health and fitness, something you and I really lean into with a lot of our different tools and different tasks. So the question here would be, what's the one thing I can do to improve my health such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So Mike, hit us with an example here.
All right. Commit to a daily 30-minute exercise routine, which could lead to better energy levels, mental clarity, and overall health. And what would be crazy, spice it up, do it earlier in the morning. So then you feel good and energized for the day, awake for the day. Maybe you need less coffee in the day. Who knows? Maybe you've got so productive, you have more time to go for a walk at the end of the day, which I quite like to do. So here's the thing, Mike, isn't it interesting? This is more than just, Dave Allen getting things done. This is more than just having like to-do lists. This is about asking yourself, if I was to do one thing, how does this create advantages for me in the long term, right? And so sometimes you are postponing immediate gratification and playing the long game, right? It's the classic thing of every month putting $100 in your saving account, every month putting $1,000 in your investment account, right? These things, just keep doing them religiously, automatically is even better. And then at some point you wake up and go, oh, geez, I've got a lot of money in my stock account. How did that happen?
I think you're right. Betting on yourself, I suppose, is one way of putting it, isn't it? And, my one tip that I've got that I can share is having a mantra on my to-do list every day that says, do something today that you'll thank yourself in the future for.
Right.
So whether that's, basic upskilling, maybe that's nurturing the relationships that I have with existing clients, whatever it might be, something small, start to make it a little bit of a habit each day. Because as we know, as you just pointed out with James Clear, those returns will get better and better each day, won't they?
Yeah. I don't know, this is a bit tangential, so forgive me for this, but it reminds me of the classic thing where when you speak to a manager in a business and they've got a team of people and you say, well, why isn't someone in your team doing that? Why are you doing that? And their answer will be, it's faster if I do it.
Oh, yes.
Okay, here we go. So this is not one thing thinking. Like if you were to say, okay, what's the one thing I can do now that's going to make the future easier, better, or actually, so I don't even have to do it, is to teach others in the organization to do it. Now, you are deferring your immediate gratification because maybe you have to invest more time up front to train and educate that person. But here's the thing. Once they get a handle on it, they're off to the races. But the other benefit is they're really grateful that you showed trust and belief in them to give them a new skill. Oh, and by the way, number 3, you gave them a new skill, so they're more valuable, right? But this is often contrary. How many times you see people, it's just quicker if I do it. But those people become bottlenecks, right? Because they go on holiday and everyone's like, well, only Jimmy can do it, right?
Yeah. Look, Mike, I've been in that position before myself.
Yeah.
I've been the guy who defaults into, no, I'll just do it myself. It's quicker. But you're right. Through nurturing others, helping them upskill, not only are you doing yourself a favor, because when you go on holiday, you no longer are the guilty party that sort of leaves everything up in the air. You're also helping others.
Yes.
So whatever motivates you, whether you want to help, whether you want to build a better system inside the business, whether you want to just make it a little bit easier for yourself in the long run, you're right. That idea of delegating, educating others is so valuable, and it will drive towards opening up a lot of different avenues, won't it?
It really, really will. Now, you might be tempted to think, Mark's a sharp guy. Mike, he's okay. He's a bit rough on the edges, but they haven't really convinced me against this world of multitasking. I can have my phone open, my iPad open, my laptop. I can be on a call. I can be watching the sports. I can be placing bets on the sports. You might think that you're a multitasking ninja. So I think it's only fair, Mark, that we sort of invert our thinking for a moment and just look at what's the option that is directly opposed to focusing on the one thing, and that's multitasking. So let's remind ourselves of just what that looks like.
Yeah, you're totally right, Mike. Multitasking, I think, as we're going to find out today, is a bit of a myth. So what better voice, what better educator to help us understand this concept from The One Thing by Keller than Productivity Game? He's got a fantastic animation that he's going to take us through now, and he's going to share the concept of context switching issues.
As I read through the chapters trying to understand how focusing on less can help you achieve more, I was reminded of a chart that I came across in the book Quality Software Management by Gerald Weinberg. Gerald studied several software programmers over the course of several years and discovered that a significant percentage of programmers' productivity seemingly vanished when they focused on more than one project during the day. The more projects they took on, the more time seemed to vanish. By taking on 2 projects, they appeared to waste 20% of their day. When they were taking on 5 projects, 80% of their day was completely lost to non-productive activities. Gerald describes that loss in productivity as a result of context switching. Here is a simple exercise to help you understand the side effects of context switching. See how fast you can count from 1 to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that was just under 1 second. Now list the letters in the alphabet from A to E. A, B, C, D, E. It took about the same time. Now try to alternate between counting numbers and sequencing letters. 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, 5E. Alternating my focus to complete both tasks took me twice as long as doing each task independently. Now why is that? Both tasks are super easy and familiar to me. Why is there such a significant drop in my performance? Well, the book The One Thing describes that the extra time needed to switch your focus adds up because we need time to make the decision to switch, and we need to remember where we left off before we switched. We also need to recall the rules of executing a particular task. In the case of the software programmers, if a programmer needed to solve problems throughout the day on multiple projects, he or she was forced to spend mental processing power to figure out where they left off and what they needed to do within the constraints of that particular project. Whenever we have more than one priority at any given time, or are asked to manage more than one project throughout the day, we experience the energy-depleting, productivity-destroying effects of switching our focus. To minimize switching costs throughout the day, we need to get good at asking a question when we are tempted to focus on more than one priority at a time. Why a question? Well, questions direct our focus. They engage our critical thinking. When we ask a question, our brain will always try to answer it. Asking better questions allows our brain to come up with better answers. The question that stands at the heart of this book, and at the heart of your moment-by-moment effectiveness, is what one thing can I do such that by doing it, makes everything else easier or unnecessary? Ask this question when you feel anxious or overwhelmed. Ask this question when you feel yourself getting distracted. Ask yourself this question over and over again until you develop laser-like focus.
Mark, I think we may have landed consistently the message of one thing, right? One thing. But, you know, as we were going through that video, it just reminds me of the moments where I've gone really deep in the morning on one project. And let's say it's 11 a.m. and I'm going to go to the next one. Even despite having done deep work. And then let's say I did one thing for one client and then I go to another one, right? I really do find myself now, where were we in that discussion that we had yesterday? Because I have to deliver something off the back of that. That's right. And where were we? And then, so how was I going to think about that? Like, how do I figure out this problem solution, or how do I get a recommendation together? And that moment, you can find yourself like, you really become aware of how slow you're thinking when you've just switched into something new. Had I been in that all morning, I'd just be like, I got it. I'm with it. Boom, 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 boom. But because my brain, just for the sake of metaphor, has been always is sitting over here on project on the left. When I go over to the right, I'm like, oh yeah, we were talking about that. And then I have to look up the note that I made. And then I get out my notepad. What did we say 2 days ago? We mentioned something in the product, or there was something about the business that I have to remember that affects this, or it's the person that does it. I forget their name. Then you go into email, then, oh, shish, I've just seen another email, before you know, we're like, oh my gosh, I'm nowhere, right? So this idea of switching costs is massive. Even simple 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, you start to see how hard it is to even switch between simple activities. So imagine when we're being like good little knowledge workers, focusing on complex problems and figuring out a process or inventing something new, you can see how we get lost, right?
Big time. And for me, Mike, I always catch myself. We can talk about maybe some of the hacks that we've each got in a second as well. But the way that I notice it and I can really feel it is when, as you were just saying, you get distracted. For me, my mind gets murky. It's kind of like you're in a pond or murky water, and you don't quite have that laser 20/20 vision on the task at hand, because there's always something, maybe 20-30% of my brain is thinking about something else. It's the same as, let's say, pulling together the podcast show or recording us today. If you and I were trying to multitask right now, doing a little bit of work or answering texts or messages from clients, what's going to happen? Well, we wouldn't be able to have a conversation. We'd be distracted. So if we then apply that into a business setting, it only makes sense that multitasking is not going to be the most effective way forward.
Yep.
Because I'm always going to be distracted. I'm never able to put my full attention. It's like driving a car. Using your phone while driving a car, it doesn't make sense because you're distracted. And I think, Mike, that's exactly what we're really understanding and learning about here, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's why I'm really trying to maximize the maximum length that I allow for a call is 45, and always allow a 15-minute buffering time, because that becomes my switching, catch up to date a bit on things, check my list, check my priorities, then dive into another call. But I just want to stress to you, I experience, even if I'm not trying to multitask and I did 2 hours on one project and then I want to spend the next hour on another project, that switch in between there, even if I'm being a very good boy, notifications turned off, do not disturb is on, I do notice the first 10 or 15 minutes of the transition into the new task. I'm like, even if I was fully engaged in the call we had about it the day before, I still notice, because I was over here on the left, just because I've gone right to a different place, it's almost like I have to go grab the data and bring it up to the top of the database again. It's there, but I can't instantly recall it. I have to kind of warm up a little bit. That's the best way I can describe it. So even if we're not multitasking, the switching still takes a toll, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's a little bit like meditation. What you learn when you're meditating is to acknowledge distracting thoughts, notice whether you're thinking or feeling, and then just navigate back to the task at hand, whether that's relaxation, trying to focus on a task or something like that. Whenever something crops up, and let's say we're recording today and I'm thinking about something else, I'll catch myself and think, oh, no.
Right.
Put that to one side. Come back to that later. Do it justice.
Yes.
By making time for it later, not right now. You're in the middle of something else. So it's really about discipline, isn't it? As well as noticing, acknowledging, and then bringing your attention back into the task that you've promised yourself that you're going to work on right now.
Yeah. Because if you fall for distraction and multitasking and saying yes to everything, the quality of your output diminishes so very much. And I think, like, as we speak about this, and we've spoken a lot about deep work, we've got a great show on Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. Mark, what is that famous distraction-free destination that you can go and get the back catalog of all our Cal Newport shows?
Well, you're quite right. It is distraction-free. Pop along, everybody, to www.moonshots.io for a distraction-free destination that'll help you unlock tips, tricks, habits, and advice about being that best version of yourself, including Cal Newport's Deep Work.
So yeah, head over there if you're into that. Let's try and pull this all together now, Mark. I think you've got a clip that might kind of complete the picture for us. Why don't you let it rip and we can break it down?
You're right, Mike. We've learned about context switching costs, focus, the problem with multitasking, but really there's a secret tip that helps you and I and all of our listeners and members bring it into action today. How are we going to start something today? And Mike, what we're going to hear from Gary in the next clip is that it really requires focus, really requires accountability.
Well, focus is very brutal because I'm going to say, well, what's your goal? What do you need to accomplish? If there's one goal of all the goals that you've set for yourself right now, what's the one that matters most, such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary, and you'd be happy with the accomplishment of that. And that's going to force someone to set a priority. Most people set priorities, and I don't understand that. If priority means doing the most important thing, how can you ever have priorities? You can't have the most important things. It doesn't actually make sense. So we have a priority. So I'd ask you, what's the most important thing that you can do such that by doing it, by accomplishing that goal? And you're going to give me an answer. You're going to ultimately say, well, if I can only do one, I'm going to do this. I say, okay, that's all I want. I want you to do one. I want one goal accomplished. What is that? And you're going to give it to me. And I'm going to say, great. Now, based on that goal, when you look at all the things that you could do in order to accomplish that goal, what would be the one thing you could work on right now that if you got that done, everything after that you need to do would be easier or unnecessary? And you're going to give me an answer. And I'm going to say, well, let's just stop right there. Now, let's go to your calendar. Now, how many hours a day do you think it's going to take that you're going to have to focus on to get that one thing done in order so we could get on to the other things? And you're going to give me a time, and I'm going to say, oh, great. So what time in the morning can we start at that? And you're going to give me a time. I say, great. Can we block out 4 hours to do just that, or at least 3 hours? Can you give me 3? And you're going to say, sure. I say, okay, great. Can you give me a plan? What's the one thing you can do to protect your time such that nobody invades the time while you're doing those things? And you're going to tell me that. And I say, great. Can you implement that? You say, yes. Okay, great. I'll talk to you in a week.
And how often a week later when you talk to people have they actually been able to sit down? Because I find that we live in the most ADD of all times. People can't even 15, I talk about reading a book a day, and people are like, I can't even read a page a day. Do you think, is it discipline? Is it discipline, or people just aren't educated to the value of focus?
Yeah, see, I think it's a little both. I mean, I think, unfortunately, it's a complicated answer. I think, number one, that people are not educated on the value of focus. They use it, they say it, they're almost anesthetized to the idea of it, and they've never been trained on how to do it. They have bought into the idea of multitasking, the idea. I mean, you even hear stories that research says that women are better at it than men, and you go, well, if multitasking is getting nothing effectively done, I don't think anybody wants to be known famously for being that good at it.
Right.
I think that's it. I think at the end of the day, people aren't just committed. I mean, if you ask me, say, well, do you have things that matter to you? Say, yeah. Well, how much do they matter? Do you want to master it? Do you want to be really good at it? Do you want it to change? Do you be so good at it that it defines and changes your life? Well, yeah. Okay, well, you're going to have to focus. Are you committed to doing that? So the biggest challenge that most people have is they haven't thought it through that way, and they're not accountable. I find that most people, their biggest issue is they haven't submitted themselves to accountability.
Now, here's the thing, the accountability thing. When I think about the accountability, I think it's happens in many different places, Mark. I think it's one, if you say, here's my one thing in the moment, do you stick to that? Do you turn off notifications? Do you actually do the work? But then I think it's also to see it through. I think the hardest thing about the accountability, it's like the classic January, February period. Everyone hits the gym, and then by March, most people aren't going anymore. How do we, when we commit to one big thing that's really going to unlock things for us, how do we make ourselves accountable, not only short-term, but long-term? What's your go-to, Mark?
It's funny you bring up the example of gyms in January, because I've just started going back into Start With Why with Simon Sinek. And I think that could be a bit of an aha moment that is an add-on into Gary's work here with the one thing. I think knowing why, knowing your foundation or your vision, perhaps, maybe we could bring in a bit of Cal Newport here with regards to daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly planning, understanding what your goal is or your vision is for a certain period of time, then helps you focus, and it helps you stay accountable to that overarching goal or the reason why that you're doing it. Again, when you've got a huge priority list, where do I start? What is the priority? often is answered by knowing what it is that you're trying to achieve in the long run. Maybe that's career development, maybe it's building a legacy, or maybe it's building a business that, satisfies a lot of your customers. I think having a bit of a foundation that you can lean back on and know where that North Star is
Yes.
can help you focus. What do you think, Mike?
I think you're spot on there. I love the legacy question. If I ever need a kick in the pants, it's a question of, well, how do I want to be remembered? What's going to be left when I'm gone? I think at the heart of what you're saying is you got to be fighting for something, right?
Yeah.
I do think in the book they talk about sharing your goals with others so that they can hold you accountable. I would say sharing your goals with friends and family, publishing your goals in the big wide world is another good one. But I think that the moment it gets real is when you're doing the work and not seeing the immediate results, is to keep going because you believe in what you're fighting for. I think that's where most champions are made. That's where most success is made. Because we're all good. We're all going to the gym and eating well in January and February. But it's March and April. Hey, it's Easter. Hey, there's a holiday. Hey, I'll get back on the horse. Don't worry. No, right? You're either on it or you're not. And I think that the biggest takeout for me on the accountability, which can give you the excitement and the energy to continue, is the end part of the question, right? Let me just read the end part of it. And it says, by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary. And so that actually means that the grind won't be forever.
Yeah.
You are teaching that person that you work with to do it, so you don't have to. Yeah. You are creating the template this time, so you don't need to next time. Right?
It's funny, isn't it? That question, that end of that question is a way of not only prioritizing, but it's simplifying. In fact, the word is in there, simplify, making it easier or unnecessary. That is such a big aha moment, because when you look at your list, maybe you've got 20, 30 items. Well, instead of doing each small piece one by one and trying to boil the ocean, do the big thing, because actually maybe it's actually going to demonstrate that some of your tasks are no longer needed.
Right.
Exactly as you said, Mike, when we were leaning into those questions earlier on business and career development, rather than starting from scratch and thinking, my job, I'm not really recognized, I better go and find a new one, start again. Well, no, do something today that then demonstrates how you are bringing value to your business where you currently are.
Right.
And then you might go up from there. So it's that small, very actionable piece, that focus, that then actually will simplify and make it a lot easier in the long run. I mean, it's such a big aha moment.
Yeah. If you think about everything that you do as part of a morning ritual as like something that's going to be very repeatable, it might take a while to figure out. And particularly if you start small, you'll end up finding that it just becomes a natural part of you. And it's the one thing you can do every morning such that the rest of the day gets better and easier, right? And I think that's why books like the 5 a.m. Club exist, right? Because people know that if that's the one thing they do when they wake up, the rest of the day is great. So we see this pattern. We see Michael Gerber, author of The E-Myth, talk about, even if you're not going to franchise your business, think about it as a franchise that you need to teach someone else to run their own version of this business. I think this is insanely powerful because so many business owners are totally victims of their business. Like the business owns them, But if they think about it as a franchise, then they have to teach the method. Like, how do we do it? How do we flip a burger? That's how McDonald's has built such an empire. Mark, it's super powerful thinking. We've covered a lot of ground. This one, I don't know where I'm going. It's hard to pick. I'm not sure where you're going. What's the homework assignment?
Yeah, it's a tricky one today, but I think, Mike, it comes back to that question. Clark, as well as Productivity Game, really called it out. The end of those questions, what's the one thing I can do to make things easier and necessary? That's going to be a question that I'm going to have plastered on my computer desktop. And when I'm looking at my task list, which sometimes recurs, sometimes it's new each day, if I ask myself that question, I think it's going to make things a little bit easier to get a hold of. What about you, Mike? Which one are you going to be leaning into?
I'm going to go right to the source at the beginning, which is stop being distracted, stop multitasking, stop saying yes to everything. And the reason I'm focusing on that is like, I feel that it is so damn hard.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So I'm going to take whatever help I can get on that one, Mark.
I agree.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you to you for putting all those clips together. And thank you to you, our listeners, our viewers, and our members too. Here we are on show 267 with Gary Keller's The One Thing. And what a book. What a follow-up to Essentialism. It's the one thing. And it started with this idea of stop doing too many things. Stop the distractions, stop the multitasking, stop saying yes to everything. Stop doing too many things. And in turn, ask yourself, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Hoo-ha! Now we're on the go. So remember that as you're, weighing this up, and if you're not 100% sure, be careful for the switching costs. You'll be amazed at how much multitasking absolutely sucks. And as you're on the course, as you're on the grind and doing the work for your one thing, remember that that focus requires accountability. And if you do that with yourself, with your friends, with your families, with your community, you'll be on the way to being the best version of yourself. And that is what we're all about here on the Moonshots Podcast. That's a wrap.